Hello, I'm Joanne Souser, and I'm a faculty member at Stony Brook University. My colleague and I, Paul Bingham, have just completed a very large research project. It's a theoretical project, and the subject was humans. We looked to see whether humans really are unique from other animals, and if they are, how did that come to be? And then after we researched that, we wanted to know, does it make a difference? Does this knowledge make a difference to the 6 billion people on Earth so that they should know what we found out? And we decided that yes, this was important knowledge. So we've recently published a book called Death from a Distance and the Birth of a Humane Universe. And we also teach the content of this theoretical project in a university online course. One of the things that we really wanted to know, I myself worked professionally. I've worked with people my whole life. I've worked in all different situations, business, private, just like the rest of you. I've had interactions with humans my entire life. And I also had interactions with non-human animals my entire life. I learned how to ride from an old cavalry instructor who knew ahead of time what an animal was going to do before it actually did it. And I used to wonder, how does he do that? So I asked him. And he said to me, before you ever want to understand an animal's social behavior, you need to understand their evolutionary history. And I never forgot that. And then when I went back into working with humans, I often watched what they did, and sometimes it was the same. You could say there were some things that were the same as non-human animals, and then other things were not. And I couldn't figure out why. Why did they do some things the same and some different? So that's when I came back to the world of academia, and I decided, well, what does science have to say about this? And what I found was there were two views. One view was that humans really are not all that different from non-human animals. We are selfish, red in tooth and claw, just like every other animal on planet Earth, as vehicles in a Malthusian world competing for mates and resources. And we were destined to constantly fall prey to one another, or to pit women against men, or race against race, or religion against religion. And that's just the way the world was. And we should get used to it. And then I looked at the other alternative view. And that one was, again, somewhere along the evolutionary chain, we suddenly developed the ability to understand that cooperation actually works better than being selfish. And that those who cooperate simply outcompete those who don't. And in that view, okay, eventually everybody would suddenly realize that competition doesn't work very well, and that cooperation works better, and that as soon as we all get it, we'll be able to negotiate our way through war and crime, and we'll no longer have those anymore. And then I looked out onto the real world, and what did I see? I saw the benefits of cooperation being robbed unless people could protect what they actually produced. I saw children who were born, that seemed to be born with this innate ability to learn. And not just learn from their mothers like non-human animals, but to learn from anybody who took the time to teach them. And then they went to school. And for some reason, they started to learn to hate school. And then I saw people with dreams of wanting to give back to the world and actually have a job that made a difference. And they pursued that goal. At the same time, they were trying to raise their families and trying to get some feeling of self-fulfillment out of this. And they, too, eventually would learn to hate their jobs. And their personal health would decline, and their families could fall apart. So what exactly was going on here? I couldn't quite understand it. And this is where we get back to now Darwin's unanswered question. Charles Darwin understood the evolution of organisms through natural selection. He understood it in general, but he did not understand why and how humans came to be unique from all other animals. He didn't understand that. We are very different from them. We're not the same. We dominate planet Earth. We sit in a room like this and we talk to one another. When non-human animals would never do that. We collaborate with each other. But I also saw that we also use language for hate. We use it for love, we use it for hate, we use it for all these things. So what really makes the difference? But then I looked at history. And I said, okay, we've made some progress. Do we really need to know the answer to this? Does it make a difference? Why do sometimes we make progress and other times we fall backwards? Well, once I understood the understanding completely of why humans are unique and how we came to be that way, I started to see that these backward steps were not necessary. We don't need to make those mistakes. And so a true understanding of how humans came to be unique is important. It will help us solve world problems. it will help to make the world a better place for the 6 billion people on Earth. So we did learn. The one answer was that humans learn to manage the conflict of interest problem between non-kin individuals. This is individuals that are not related to you, very close. We've learned to manage that conflict of interest problem, and no other animal on planet Earth has ever learned to do it at the scale that we do. And at times, we use it very, very well. And that's when we cooperate. That's when you start to see us making a difference in the world. At other times, it fails us. And that's when you start to see our violence and our inhumane behavior. So at this point, I'd like to turn over to Professor Paul Bingham.
Thank you, Joanne. As Joanne mentioned, this book and this course are the products of a really massive research enterprise that we've had the good fortune, actually, to participate in over the last decade at least. We've had some outstanding collaborators, including the economist and game theorist Daijiro Okada, who made very important contributions to the effort. And we've also had the support of some really outstanding colleagues. George Williams, the Crawford Laureate here at Stony Brook, was very instrumental early. Mary Martsky, Rob Blumenschein, Philip Reitmeyer helped us with paleoanthropology, and many other individuals contributed in really large ways to this project. We're fortunate to have had their help, and a lot of the quality of what we've been able to do comes from their contribution. So what have we done? We've come up with a very simple answer to Darwin's unanswered question. Humans are a one-trick pony, a one-note hula hoop. There's one thing that we do. We manage the conflict of interest problem, and as we'll see as the course and the book unfold, we'll see how we came to do that. As a result of doing that, all the other things about us, our properties and our history, emerge. I'll give you some sense over the next few minutes of how that can be true, how such a simple thing can have such pervasive, global, and substantial implications. The product of what we've done will turn out to be both profound new understanding of ourselves. We'll understand why the world looks and feels to us as it does. We'll understand why other people behave as they do. And from that will actually come a rich new appreciation and respect for our common humanity. So as we go through the story over the next few minutes, keep that always in mind. We're not only going to understand ourselves better, but we're going to come to respect our common humanity more. There's a tendency to look at Darwinian theories of human evolution as dehumanizing. We're going to make the opposite argument. We're going to argue that once we have the right theory of the origin of humans by natural selection, it is profoundly humanizing. Not only is it humanizing in that subjective sense, but it gives us enormous power to take charge of the present and the future on behalf of all 6 billion of Earth's children, as Joanne just alluded to. So the practical payoff is also enormous. So we, as Joanne said, we have become committed to writing the book and teaching the course because we think there's something important for people to understand. So what is our problem? So we obviously do a lot of really individually remarkable things. We speak, we have large and powerful minds. I'll remind you of that in a moment. But we also run the planet. So this is a kind of quirky, iconic image. This is a great wind farm, wind turbine farm in near San Diego, taking advantage of the persistent winds off the Pacific to generate electricity. In fact, we consume and generate energy on a scale completely unique, never seen before on planet Earth. As most of you know, if you photograph the Earth from the night sky from orbit, what do you see? It glows in the dark from the light and heat we emit. No other animal consumes the kind of energy that we do on the scale that we do by orders of magnitude. So not only do we have these unique individual properties, but collaboratively, cooperatively, we have this power to dominate the planet that no other animal could even remotely imagine. What I'm going to argue to you or predict for you in the next couple of minutes is that our answer to Darwin's unanswered question gives us both those things. Why do we have these quirky individual properties, and why do we build wind farms and pump oil out of the ground by the gigabarrel and all of the other things that we do? So let's confront our problem first. What are we dealing with here? So these are our closest living relatives, chimps and gorillas. In fact, chimps are more closely related to us than they are to gorillas. And yet chimps are not going to be leaving footprints on the moon anytime soon unless we take them there. We are apes, and yet we're something completely new. That's our challenge, to understand why that is. Let's define some of what we have to account for. So this is a human skull and a chimp skull back to back. Notice the difference in size in the brain case. Chimps are our closest living relatives. Our brains are 3.5 times bigger than theirs. Immense change. Not only is that true, but that immense physical change occurred in a spectacularly rapid timescale. This complicated figure summarizes the following simple punchline. If you measure the brain size of living and fossil apes, including us as an ape brain size doesn't change for tens of millions of years. And then around 2 million years ago, in one lineage, boom, it grows explosively overnight on an evolutionary time scale. So over a few 100,000 years, our ancestors' brain size starts increasing radically until we're sitting here today with brains 3.5 times bigger than our chimp-like ancestors. So looking at this, we know that our human origins involves an enormous amount of genetic change. Our genotype has changed to redesign our life history to give us these enormous brains. Okay, so that seems to frame the question, right? It looks like it's a genetic problem. So in fact, this is an iconic image. This is in fact the statue of the famous double helix, commissioned by one of its discoverers, Jim Watson, as the director of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. At the same time we were discovering the things you saw in the last couple of slides, that humans arose explosively about 2 million years ago. In that same 50-year time period, last half of the 20th century, modern molecular genetics was being worked out. In fact, I had the good fortune to participate in it. I did my PhD at Harvard in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology that Jim Watson founded. I grew up in this culture and continue to work in this culture. The spectacular success of molecular genetics in unifying all of biology, however, comes with a risk. There's a famous little joke line which goes, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Molecular genetics has become so successful that people who studied evolutionary biology tried to incorporate molecular genetics prematurely into their explanations, assuming that genetic change drove the evolution of human uniqueness. We're going to make exactly the opposite argument. Genetic change clearly occurred and clearly is important, but it is an effect, not a cause. At every moment in the 2 million years human story, from the beginning, social change drives genetic change. Genetics is a dependent variable, not an independent variable. So in fact, even though we're interested in the biological origins of humans, this story is going to be about our social evolution. That perspective turns out not only to be enormously powerful in understanding why we speak and why we have large and powerful minds, but as I'll show you in a few minutes, it turns out to predict a theory of history of completely unprecedented power. Completely unprecedented power. Let me begin to introduce you in a little more detail than Joanne did a moment ago to what the theory is, and then let's look at some examples of how powerful it is. And as we go through these examples, I really have two objectives. One is kind of the narrow scientist objective, trying to break the theory on the facts. Ask, does the theory actually predict the things that we see? For non-scientists, that often seems like kind of a dry exercise only of interest to scientists. It's not, because if the theory survives our doubt, if it survives our attempts to break it on the facts, it becomes a tool that all 6 billion of us can use to conceive and design our common future. So our goals here are not only narrowly scientifically, they are broadly social. This is about the human future, first and foremost, not just about the obsessions of a few tens of thousands of evolutionary biologists. Okay? All right.